Welcome to Unpacking Autism with Reena Anand, the podcast where stories are shared, hearts are touched, and we grow together in empowerment to help our autistic children thrive. Hi everyone, thanks very much for tuning in to today's podcast. Today is a super special one. I have a lady who I can only describe as a powerhouse of knowledge and experience, someone whom I've looked up to immensely for many years. I actually went up to her once after I attended a forum years ago when Effie was in nursery and I was in pieces because things were not going well. And she was just such a source of support. And years later when we met and I reminded her, and I remembered, I was thinking, she does this for people all the time. She's not going to remember me, but she always has extended kindness to every parent who has children with special educational needs and is a real source of love and encouragement. So I'm delighted to present to you Olivia King-Boateng today. Olivia is a parent of a soon-to-be 19-year-old boy with Down syndrome, autism, and severe learning disabilities. He was diagnosed at birth, and that's when Olivia's journey, her SEN journey, started. Despite lots of medical issues, Olivia talks very positively about the support that she received for her son through the hospital therapy services to Portage and then to her son's special school. Despite having a background in business and management, she had to stop working to concentrate on looking after her son. And she first got involved in supporting the community through voluntary work at the special school, where she started to run coffee mornings for parents. And through doing this, she realized that by sharing her experience and the information about the support that she was receiving, it was a huge source of inspiration to other parents. So she then trained to become a paid parent ambassador for the school for 2 years and the chair of the PTA. In 2008, she got involved with the Aiming High for Disabled Children initiative, a nationwide government initiative, and started running the Harrow Parent Carer Forum as a chair and then secretary in 2020. In 2017, she founded and became the CEO of Special Needs Community to provide more specialist support and advocacy for parents by working closely with early support and multi-agency safeguarding hub teams. SNC, which is short for Special Needs Community, has helped to develop an inclusive all-ability playground, which contains swing sets for all abilities and those with mobility issues, including wheelchair users. And it also continues to engage with a wide range of families and professionals to develop projects that impact the community locally and nationwide. Olivia, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast.
Thank you, Reena. This is an amazing opportunity. I was always glad to have a conversation with you. This is a really important podcast, and I hope lots of people are listening.
Thank you. So, should we start with your own personal experience? So, Tell me a bit about your experience of parenting a child with special educational needs.
Yeah, so my experiences really started with the birth of my son. So my son was born with Down syndrome, and it all kind of was a massive shock. So it started, from when he was born, and things got really complicated. I can honestly tell you, for the 5 years since he was born, I was in a bit of a trance. I had 3 objectives: eat, sleep, and keep him alive, because he had lots of medical problems and, things like that. So, but, it took a while for things to settle down. And then, that's when all the support kicked in. But, with that, obviously you have family issues as well. So it brought a lot of stress on my marriage at the time. And unfortunately, my husband and I decided to separate and get a divorce. It was a lot on the family. Yeah.
Wow. And actually there are statistics that show that parents of children with special educational needs do have a higher divorce rate. And I can understand, actually, whilst Evivan doesn't have the same issues as your son did, I remember going completely into that mode of it's all about him. And neglecting my relationships with my friends, with my siblings, with my husband, because I drew this narrative in my head as well that nobody in my wider circle would understand. And it can just you can so easily become distanced from your partner because your life is upended by a child with a diagnosis, and you're trying to figure out this way of life that no one's prepared you for.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what comes in is all the cultural stuff.
Mm,
So my husband and I had clearly, so what it does, it actually highlights some of the issues that you might have had in your marriage before, and it puts it on a pedestal for everyone to see. And
yeah,
what it really highlighted is that our different perspectives are looking at it from a cultural perspective. Even though we've come from the same country, we are
yeah,
different tribes from the same country, but we had a completely different understanding or
yeah,
acceptance level of what it
yeah,
means to have a child with special needs.
yeah,
And like you say, I just put my head down. I've got to keep my son alive, and then
yeah,
the rest of it kind of just took a hold,
mm,
and here we are.
yeah.
So that's kind of how it unfolded itself.
Amazing. So what's your why? I mean, obviously, you're a dedicated parent, and you've done so much more than just focus on your child. You work, and you have done ever since you've been able to, since your son was young, right through to now. Your whole life has basically been about serving the community and nationally children with special educational needs. And what is it about this that just makes you so passionate to make a difference?
Yeah. So for a lot of people, you're if you're kind of in the neurotypical world and you're just getting on with your life, and you don't sense doesn't touch your life in that way, you're when you have like that kind of intimate understanding of what it means to have a child with special needs, it is a whole new world. You
Mm,
are plunged into a whole new world. Um, all the, there's so much complexity in this world of SEND as a parent, as you
yeah.
know, that it's hard to explain it to another parent or another person who's not involved in the SEND community. And when I say the SEND community, I mean teachers, I mean professionals, anyone
Mm,
who's kind of relates in that to that those people, but mostly parents. One of the things I say is that as parents, we are living on the same planet, but we are in two completely different worlds. So it's been a huge learning curve for me to understand what SEN is about.
mm,
And SEN is such a spectrum in itself, because there's somebody who's got mild SEN versus somebody who's quite extreme.
yeah.
All those people are in this one community. It's not possible for us to understand all of it. And if you
Mm,
imagine that research, there's constant research about different types of SEN. And so it's a constant learning curve for everybody. And so as a parent, I first had to educate myself about what SEN means, but most importantly, SEN in terms of how my child presents.
mm,
And I've had to kind of, yes, there's lots of textbooks about SEN, but the only thing that's really important, how it relates to your child. So I've had to educate people about what my child presents. He doesn't fit the normal textbooks. So
yeah,
my son has Downs, and then he was diagnosed with autism when he was 8. But I recognized the signs when he was 3.
yeah.
And I was starting, only because I was involved in my son's school, I started to go, oh, what's that about? Why is he presenting that way? And so
Mm,
I did a lot of courses. I talked to lots of professionals, and I had to go, you know what? I think he has autism. And so
mm,
I had to start that journey for myself and educate myself in order to support my son, because I desperately wanted to help him, but I just didn't know what to do. I didn't
mm,
know. Nobody knew my son like I knew my son.
yeah. Mm,
So it was a journey of learning for me, and then it was a journey of learning to engage with everyone who supported him, whether at school, whether at play scheme, whether the carer, and go, this is what he does, this is what when he does this, he means this. So you have to be in that position of knowing for yourself so that you can explain it to other people.
mm,
And so my why has really come from helping different types of people understand that no size fits all.
yeah,
There's no such thing as much as we like to categorize children under this whole umbrella of SEN or SEND, there is no one size fits all.
yeah.
It's great that the textbooks explain lots of things, but the textbook cannot explain everything about one child.
Yes.
They are three-dimensional people. There might be, very similar characteristics, but rarely are they
Mm,
one that fits a child completely. So
Yeah.
for instance, my son has Downs and autism, and I was told early on in my research, in my conversations, that, oh no, that's not possible, we can't have Downs and autism, they're two opposing things, that's like Jekyll and Hyde. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I don't know what that means. All I know, he presents like this and he presents like this.
Yes. Yes.
So it's kind of just going, oh, so then I was like, well, what is autism? Explain to me what autism is
Yeah.
in the way that people understand it. So in me coming to find that out, I've had to educate other professionals who told me that it's not possible to have Downs and
Yes.
autism. And actually, it's quite possible to have
Yeah.
Downs and autism.
Yeah.
So I think what's important is that the community together has to keep learning together. We
Yeah.
need professionals, and professionals need us.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, in a 24-hour day, professionals are with our children for 5 hours. We are with our children 18 hours of that same day.
Yeah.
And then we've got the weekends and holiday period. So none of us have 100% information about what it means to either have SEN or the right kind of education.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
together, we can learn so much more.
Yeah.
There is nothing to it other than we both need each other. So for
Yeah.
me, my why is helping professionals understand parents, and then parents to understand where professionals are coming from, and understanding the education around SEN.
Yeah.
And that has to be the only thing that can really support our children all round. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah. Amazing. I mean, it totally comes through. And anyone who's met you will say the same. I think it's incredible when I see parents who, on top of navigating parenting a child who
Yeah,
obviously continues to grow and will continue to have other, perhaps new challenges along the way, still
yeah,
go out into this space to say, you know what, I've been through this. I'm coming out to show you this is what I went through and this is what you can do to avoid maybe the pitfalls I've had or to make your life better. So
absolutely.
it's amazing what you do. Is absolutely incredible. So tell me a bit about your cultural background.
So I'm from Africa, specifically Ghana, West Africa, and even within the same country of Ghana, there are tribal angst. So I'm from the tribe called Ewe, and my husband's from a tribe called Ashanti. So even now we had, like, issues of getting married. You have to, but we get that in the Asian community. So it's very common thing to have kind of differences within your own wider culture.
Yeah.
So I would say within Ghana or in Africa, generally speaking, the concept of SEN is not very well understood, and we don't have the research background to really help us kind of put the foundations in the education system. So the education system itself is probably not a right helpful system. So up to recently, everyone had to pay for education. You know, all the
Yeah.
families had to pay for education somehow. It's only recently that education was become free,
Mm.
and things like benefit system. What's that?
Yeah.
So there is a lot of structures that haven't been put in place. So when it comes to SEN, generally the cultural understanding of SEN is quite low. What most
Mm.
people, especially Africans, are really passionate about, and I know from my Asian friends, this is quite common in the Asian culture as well. Education is everything. You've
Yeah.
got to be a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor, and anything less than that is, slumming it. So, we already put our children up on that pedestal. And so, education is something that we really invest in. So
Yeah.
if you imagine that a child with SEN, if they're not hitting the milestones, it becomes very difficult for families. So,
Yeah.
that's where the struggle really starts from. But things
Yeah.
are changing slowly. But
Yeah.
it's unfortunate that those foundation is not put in place. But it's more of a wider cultural understanding that everybody needs to improve on.
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
certainly echo that from an Asian perspective and my experience. I trained as a lawyer because it was seen to be a very well regarded job. And I think
yeah,
a lot of, certainly from my family, a lot of their thinking around education being the way and the savior came from their own background of extreme
Yes.
poverty.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so education was basically the way out.
The way out.
And but what's happened with that is sometimes there's just less respect for non-highly academic professions. And it also, I guess sometimes I only realized how much the ideologies that I was brought up with impacted me as a parent when Evie
Yes.
was suspended from school at the
Yes.
age of 4.5. So here I am, a lawyer, with a son who's 4.5 that's been, suspended from school. And my world was just a spin. And I'm not going to lie, one of the key questions in my head was, what are people going to say? What are people in my family and my
Yes.
community going to say? Because that was just something that we always used to be so aware of and would
Yes.
outwardly perform in accordance with what the wider society and community would find acceptable. Do you have that?
Absolutely.
Do you have that similar? Did you have that similarity?
Absolutely, absolutely. As much as we're, from different cultures, the mindset is very similar.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there's also the religious element.
Yeah.
A lot of people, Africans have very strong religious, well, like every other, continent or country, have quite strong religious beliefs. We generally are brought up with, Christianity is very big. Obviously, there's other cultures like Muslims there as well, but Christianity is something that's, a lot of Africans or Ghanaians would say they're Christians.
Mm-hmm.
So for those who haven't come to that same level of understanding, to have a child with SEN, oh, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
So it's there are so many elements to that brings itself to the fore when you have a child with SEN. That kind of certainly exposes so much, and you do have to kind of challenge your own thinking and go, oh, am I thinking those things? But this is my child. I know that there is nothing wrong with him, but how do I process what I've been brought up with what I know, which is my child is pure
Yes.
young little person, so it does kind of put you in a position where you have to, you're left to having to recalibrate what you believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And how were your family or community around accepting your son's disabilities?
Well, unfortunately, my family has really struggled. Just like what I explained before, just not understanding what is SEN, what caused it. Is it our fault? Is it something that's in our genetics that's
Yeah.
caused it?
Yeah.
And so I found that we've been ostracized, and do you know what? It's really strange because I never took it personally
Yeah.
because I knew that they didn't understand. So I never really got a lot of support, but
Yeah.
equally I found support elsewhere. So
Yes.
within time you do. Initially it's very painful. It's very
Yeah.
painful from with the people who you grew up with, even your own parents
Yeah.
and siblings. They find that really challenging, and you
Yeah.
kind of have to recognize it as a challenging thing, not take it personally. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a struggle, and so what it does is it kind of forced me into a kind of isolation for a little bit
Yeah.
until I had to learn how to get used to my new norm
Yeah.
and find my new norm and live the best life that we could. But yeah, it's definitely challenging. And I know that other parents tell me the same thing, that
Yeah.
they have very challenging relationships with their own family. And they're really shocked because you think, well, hold on, this is my child. You know me. Why are you treating us like we can't have
Yeah.
anything to do with you? Or,
Yeah.
so it's a very challenging time, but
Yeah.
it's important to kind of help help yourself first,
Yes.
and then see if you can find a way to bridge that gap. But it's going to take time, and it
Yeah.
has taken time for
Yeah.
things to improve.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you support a lot of families across the borough.
Yeah.
Do you see this through the variety of cultures that of from the people that come to you for support and advocacy support?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Again, not necessarily blame or Black and ethnic
Yeah.
minorities, it's lots of different cultures. There
Yeah.
are just like layers and layers of complexity to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and if you're already struggling to understand what SEN is, and your family is not being supportive, and
Yeah.
you're physically overwhelmed, a lot of parents, it really takes them to
Yeah.
a crisis point.
Yes.
And sometimes all you can do is give them a shoulder to cry on, and to say,
Yeah.
hey, try to understand that it's not personal. They just don't understand.
Yeah.
And maybe it's going to take time for them to come to a level of understanding that you've had to,
Yeah.
because they haven't had that intimate relationship of what send is. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's a lot of families find it very challenging. And I think one of the most challenging aspects is if your husband, the person that you made this child together with, is
Yeah.
also finding it difficult to accept a disabled child.
Yes.
So that's a very difficult area for
Yeah.
families.
Yeah. I have seen that in some of the families that I have worked with, um, where up until the child was born, everything seemed to be fine, and where it's in my experience, it's been the mothers, but I'm sure it's not always the mother.
Yeah.
But where the mother has received a diagnosis and then switched on into the kind of parent advocate warrior kind of, right, I'm going to do everything I can for my child, and they're on this journey, they look over their shoulder and their husband's still, but way back there, still struggling with
Yes.
and often it's not, in my, what I've found is it's not often about the child, but about the conditioning and the parental expectation, and things like carrying forward your family name and
Yeah.
all this other stuff in the background that can sometimes impact traversing that journey at the same
Yeah.
speed together.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
interesting, hearing you talk about cultures, because it just, one of the things I really struggled with, and I don't know if this echoes with kind of your experience, and particularly with all the families you deal with, was asking for help.
Yes.
We were always intended to be told to be very self-sufficient,
Yes.
and you don't go talking about your personal problems out in public.
Yeah.
So when you combine that together, the thought of navigating the SEND space, bearing in mind you have had no exposure to this world whatsoever,
Yeah.
and not asking for help, it's so conflicting.
It is. I mean, that's a difficult, because the knock-on effect of the family. If you imagine, if you had a neurotypical child, the family would surround you and give you the support, babysitting, or any kind of, if you go into, say, a family event,
Yeah.
your child and their cousin are, they might be siblings, they might as well be siblings for the
Yeah.
way the family encompass them.
Yeah.
But when you've got a child with special needs, and the rest of the family doesn't know how to engage with your child, you then don't have that support system where you wouldn't normally have it.
Yeah.
So the consequences are you're living a completely different life
Yeah.
than if you had a child with a neurotypical child.
Yeah.
Your support system was your family.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that support system, who's going to provide it?
Yeah.
Social services, unfortunately, or organizations and charities are having to step in order to provide that support for you.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, but a lot of families haven't got to a stage where they can ask for help, because they feel already isolated, and they don't know, because it feels unnatural to want to be able to replicate your family by asking for social. It's such a kind of thing to do, to leave your child with somebody else who's not your family. Ideally,
Yes.
you want to leave your child with somebody who cares for them.
Yeah.
So the alternative is very difficult for families.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
That's the difficulties.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think whilst I've considered myself to be in a place of confidence now and advocacy, the journey here was supported by people who are not from my community. It wasn't the people in the Asian community that helped me get here. It was actually my white British counterparts in autism charities who provided the listening ear, who provided the encouragement to kind of help me get onto this path. And that's one of the reasons I do what I do now, because I feel like, I want there to be more representation, so that parents, also so that we know that they're not the only person who has a child with a special need. They're everywhere, but people are just not talking about it, and
Yes.
kind of behind closed doors. So, we've talked a lot about some of the challenges of navigating community and culture and all of this, but I'd love to hear from you because you work so extensively with families. I'd love to hear some success stories about where it's gone really well when parents have embraced their child's special need and then have engaged with services. What does that look like?
Well, I mean, it's a different journey for everybody.
Yeah.
Some parents are a lot more kind of switched on about what they need to do. Some parents are in denial, and it's got nothing to do with education. I
Yeah.
remember at my son's school, I was the parent who wanted to know, tell me everything. And some parents go, no, we're not acknowledging any kind of SEN. They're going to be fine.
Yeah.
So, parents are at different levels. But ultimately the journey is similar in the sense that we all come on a journey and you're part of the community. And I've seen a lot of the parents, even this one parent she was a lawyer as well, but she was definitely in denial, because like what we talked about earlier, education. She when she gave birth to her children, she had an understanding of what they were doing. They were creating a legacy. They were
Yes.
creating this empire, and then
Yeah.
suddenly she got a child that she doesn't know how to, you know, educate. They're going to
Mhm.
improve. So
Mhm.
those challenges are very difficult, even
Yeah.
for those who are seemingly very educated.
Yes.
So again, it's a very different for everybody. But one of the things that a lot of parents come to, almost like an aha moment, is a thing about labels. The word label keeps kind of resonating in their heads. But I
Yeah.
don't want them to have the label. But I
Yeah.
don't, what if other people get to label them? And this word label just goes round and round in their heads.
Yeah.
And the success stories that we've had is to get parents to really understand and change that word label to something else. So for
Mm.
instance, I've had to kind of break down the concept of the label and get them to, switch it around. So
Yeah.
to understand what your child with SEN has, you need some sort of an assessment. You want a professional to sit down with you, look at their behaviors, the things they can do, the things they can't do, the challenges they have, and then find out where they are
Mm.
with their the difficulties they're having.
Yes.
Because if you've got a broken leg, something's wrong, you just don't know what it is. But if you've done an assessment, if you went to the doctor can tell you, actually your leg's not broken, it's just sprained.
Yeah.
So to not understand what your child's difficulties are is to be no man's land and not really
Yeah.
understand what the issues are. And if you don't understand the issues, then how do you know what you're doing is making any difference to them?
Yeah.
How are you really helping them? So
Yes.
that so you know so so have an assessment done, find out what the issues are, and then if it comes to a diagnosis, you might find a diagnosis could be, oh no, they just have anxiety, or they have
Mm.
mental health issues that's causing this, or they
Mm.
might have a diagnosis for ADHD or
Mm.
autism. But they,
Mm.
again, as we know, autism is a spectrum.
Yeah.
You can have Asperger's, which is quite intelligent, appears applies to quite intelligent young people, but just have a difficulty in some social interaction. Or you can have autism that's quite severe. But where on the spectrum does your child sit, and how are you going to apply the right strategies to them? So I ask parents to really look at the word label as
Mm.
understanding.
Yeah.
I ask them to switch the word label for a process of understanding. So
Yes.
all you're doing by getting a label or a diagnosis, just better understanding.
Yeah.
And would you not rather have not have the understanding rather than have somebody else label your child as autistic when they might not be autistic?
Yeah.
It's better that you have, if it's a label of autism, it's better that you know what type. So you can say, no, actually, that's not what it is. And because you've understood what the difficulties your child is, you can take away a lot of the fear of
Mm.
the label,
Yeah.
because now actually they just have difficulties in this area. And then
Yeah.
once you understand what strategies you can help them with, you
Yeah.
find that the things that you were afraid of
Yeah.
is not as big as at all, because you know that when they reach that milestone, actually they're trying as hard as they can.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
if they're trying as hard as they can, there's no fear, because you're both doing it the best you can. So
Yeah.
I find a lot of parents go, oh gosh, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things we do that over and over again seems to be quite successful.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. It's just that shift in perspective, isn't it?
Shift in perspective. Yeah.
Amazing. If a parent is concerned, as our parents listening in and they're
Yeah.
concerned about their child's development, where should they go? What practical hints or tips would you provide parents that would support them?
Well, again, it's kind of depending on what stage you're at,
Mm.
and one of the things that makes me quite frustrated is that whereas my journey started on at the birth of my son,
Yeah.
and the supports kicked in, and this is why I do what I do, because I'm thinking, I looked around, I thought, hold on a minute, why aren't other parents getting the support that I got for my son? And so there's a lot of parents that we come across whose child is 6, 8, 11, who've
Mm.
never heard of some basic things that you and I know about.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. And sometimes, you know, it's because they were in denial, so they refused a lot of the help. And
Mm.
sometimes they just never came across the professional who was able to go, hey, have you considered, this information or that information? Can I
Yeah.
make a referral to? So the level of support families get varies so wildly, which
Yeah.
is what the Send Review at the moment is looking at, that it's really unfair to a
Yeah.
lot of families. So
Yeah.
it really depends on where people are and
Yeah.
how much people can take in,
Yeah.
because some parents can in a state where you can tell them lots of things, and professionals have done that before, but they're just not ready to receive it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the penny hasn't dropped. And so they're walking around a little bit of a trance, like I was in the 5 years my son was born. I was literally nodding at professionals giving me lots of information. I took the information and put in a pile because I just wasn't ready to
Yeah.
receive that.
Yeah.
And so it kind of depends where you are. But I also always say, if you have concerns, trust your instincts. That's where you start
Mm.
from. Trust your instincts. There's something not quite right.
Yeah.
Like we said before, there is no such thing as one size fits all. Some things that some people might suggest is an issue might not necessarily be the issue. You might
Mm.
have to do a bit of investigating. It might
Yeah.
not fit the the diagnosis, or the label might not fit your child entirely.
Yeah.
So you always have to trust your instincts and go, what is this about?
Yeah.
What's going on? I don't know what this is. And
Yeah.
don't be embarrassed about asking lots and lots of questions to lots of the different people.
Yeah.
I would say one of the things that I've really helped me is training.
Mm.
Go to as many opportunities to coffee mornings, start with there.
Yes.
Find out from other parents, well, I have a child with this need, or
Yeah.
this issue is not something I don't understand. Talk to other parents and
Yeah.
find out A, what's available, B, if other parents have the same experience. Because one of the greatest tools that we have is parenting networks,
Yeah.
because you learn so much more. I have to honestly say, I've learned so much more from other parents in
Yeah.
terms of what's available than I have from
Definitely.
professionals.
Yeah.
you know
Definitely.
and again, as parents, we will walk with you on that journey. So if you came to a parent network when your child is 16, you will have somebody who's in that network who understand what it means to have a child of 16. If you came to the parent network when your child was 3, there was
Yeah.
other parents who would hold your hand through the journey, because
Yeah.
nobody signposts you and go, at
Yeah.
the age of 5, when they go to school, this happens. At the age of 11, when they go to high school, this happens. When they hit puberty, watch out. Uh-oh. Nobody does that other than parents. So one of the important tools that we should need to use is
Yeah.
go to coffee mornings and networks,
Yeah.
listen to professionals. Not everything is applicable, but the information is useful.
Yeah.
Listen to professionals and use the strategies, practice them, experiment with them, so that
Yes.
you know what works and what doesn't. One
Yes.
of the strategies that I learned early on is positive behavior support, or positive behavior plan. And to somebody brought up in Africa, it's a complete mind shift.
Yes.
What is that about? when a child does something wrong, we chastise them. We do not praise them. We
Yes.
do not ignore, naughty behavior. And so we have to understand that our children, they didn't, because they're not neurotypical, they won't react in the same way as a neurotypical child. So you have to learn to do things differently.
Mm.
So there's so many things that you've yet to learn,
Yeah.
but be open-minded, to do your research, listen to lots of different people, and practice the strategies, because you might
Yeah.
find that it actually works. At first, it might seem like that doesn't make any sense, but research, a lot of strategies is because research has gone through them. And
Yeah.
sometimes there is such a thing as the theory reality gap. It might work great at school, but it might not work great at home, but you might be able to tweak it.
Yeah.
So first thing to do is trust your instincts, start on that journey. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. You've just got to take away the fear by understanding what this world is about and how your child perceives the world, because you almost need to look at the world from their eyes. One of the parents that I came across, because when I'm in my journey trying to understand autism, one of the parents had two boys. One had almost like Asperger's type of autism, and one had quite severe type of autism. So his communication was quite difficult. And
Yeah.
then one who was at Asperger's was describing what goes on in his mind in social settings, or why he has difficulties, why he finds it the sensory overload. And he was basically saying that sometimes it's like a party going on in his head.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was such a penny dropping for me. And so when I look at my son and he's finding it difficult in different situations, I was like, I was so full up with so much empathy. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this is his world.
Yeah.
And so you almost have to try to bring yourself down to your child's perspective of how they're experiencing life.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing that you can do, is
Yeah.
do your best to support your child. And it's difficult because you're living in two different worlds, and you just got to find a way to bridge that world for him and yourself.
Yeah.
So I would say that would be the first instinct, is to go believe in what your child is saying to you and help him find a way to live in this world, but also find a way to, the world to find things that support him as well. So find a bridge that helps your child.
Yeah. Oh, I completely echo that sentiment, Olivia. I remember how counterintuitive it felt when Evie was, see, he would present with very challenging behavior, and traditionally, you know, well, they would either be told off or worse.
Yes.
And this was I had to completely do a U-turn on that style of parenting
Yeah.
very, very early on, because that was trauma inducing.
It was.
But so this way of parenting him, where I'm like getting down to his level and saying, and he's really angry, and I'm like, I really love you, and I can see you're really distressed right now. That was never role modeled for me, and it was uncharted territory, really. And as counterintuitive as it felt, I'm so glad I stuck with it, because the traditional model of parenting was never going to work for him. And I think being open to adapting your parenting style can make a massive difference to your relationship with your child. And that doesn't mean you have to change everything, but it's just stopping and thinking of, is the way I'm, I don't want to use the word discipline, but is the way I'm parenting my child, serving them like the actual child that they are, is it actually serving them? So
and we also have to understand that there is a child, and then there is, because a child does different things. Any normal children, you don't have to have special needs to be behaving badly, so at the end of that, because sometimes I'm thinking my son is way too clever for me. He's very smart, and I'm thinking, how do you have SEM? Because you're way too clever. You already know certain things. So almost understand that your child, he's still a child in his own right, but then how does the SEN kind of impacts on how he interprets life? So you have to be mindful that you always, that your parenting is always going to be challenging. You always have to be learning. You're constantly in a learning phase. That's why you always have to be.
Oh,
Yeah,
amazing. Thank you
yeah.
so much. This has been an incredible conversation, Olivia. Where can people find out more about special needs community?
So one of the things we're very obsessed about is information, because sometimes you're not ready for the information, but you just need to know where to get it when you are ready. And there is so much out there. One of the things that we try to do is create like almost our directory, all these pull information in from lots of different places. So I would say the first port of call would be our website. We like to put in lots of different things, engage with lots of different people, and tell you what's going on nationally, as well as London, as well as locally. So we try to put everything onto our website. It's at www.specialneedscommunity.org.uk. And hopefully, you'll find lots of starting places so that you can apply a lot of things that you've learned to your local area, because that's a really important place to get started. But looking for the local offer and all the local organizations, start from there. But you can find all that information on our website.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time out
This
today. It's
this
been a
was this was
brilliant
fun.
conversation.
Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you. Thank you for
It's
having me.
incredible to see the similarities between our cultures. I find that so interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so much. It's funny when you start talking, then you start to go, oh yes, I remember this. And because you tend to put everything, you kind of like, right, finish this one, I'm going to the next one. But it's so much learning to do, so much more learning to do. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
You've been listening to Unpacking Autism with Reena Anand. Podcast artwork by Creative Stripes. Editing by Adam Jones Lloyd. And music by autistic musician Paul McGowan.